Welcome to Surfacing. In this episode, hosts Lisa Welchman and Andy Vitale speak to Ron Bronson. Ron has deep experience working at the intersection of digital policy, service design, and systems. The conversation centered around why so many services are poorly designed and what needs to happen to improve both digital and physical world services for users. Ron also gives Andy some advice on selecting the proper tee, and Lisa asks about Ron's interest in the Finnish sport Pesäpallo.
So we were taught, your ears were probably burning because we were just obviously beforehand talking about what questions we were going to ask you, Ron, and it's too many.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a list of things that didn't make the list. One of them is tea.
Okay.
Which I have a personal interest about. So
yes,
if you come on again sometime, maybe we can talk about tea, or maybe we can sneak the tea collection tea in, mostly because I think I want to know something about tea more than I do, and I'm a really big tea drinker, right? Green tea drinker in particular.
I can send you all kinds of recommendations or places you can buy from.
Yeah.
I don't sell tea. I don't sell tea anymore, but because I did for a while. But I left lots of places I source from, and so like retail and that are great, depending on what you want for greens or whatever else. Yeah, I love talking about tea. It's kind of ridiculous.
Cool. So
that's
Andy,
kind of awesome though, because my wife loves green tea and I don't. I like all the weird like pumpkin teas and cherry teas and
I can't do anything flavored. I can't do any. I can't talk about herbal things or flavor things. I don't really have a lot of people come to me. It's like, oh, I want to buy herbal tea for my mom's birthday, and I'm like, it's not my department. Sorry.
So
talk to someone else.
I am an equal opportunity teaist. If a teaist is it? What do you call someone who drinks tea?
A tea drinker.
A teetotaler.
Tea drinker.
Right.
So I'm an equal opportunity tea drinker. And so I love black teas, I love green teas, and I love herbal teas. One of my favorite evening habits is to put a couple of dried hibiscus flowers and some mulberry leaves, white mulberry leaves in, and make that. It's a really good before bed non-caffeine thing. So I like to do that. But anyhow, so we're obviously not going to be talking about tea on this podcast as well. And music is another thing. So I think that you're one of those people that I can't remember, have actually never met in person.
No, we never met in person.
That's exactly right. You're one of those people I only know from Twitter. Right.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
so it's because I'm like, have I actually ever met Ron? It's like, I don't think I've ever met the dude.
No, that'd have been the coolest conversation, but no.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
One of the few people, including Mike Montero, who we interviewed another time, who when you say Alice Coltrane, you were like, she's so underrated. And I was like, yes, she is.
Gosh.
Very underrated.
So great.
Absolutely fabulous. But anyhow, so we're not going to get to talk about that either.
It's a good thing though, because my musical tastes are questionable.
They're not questionable.
You know what? It's all right.
Anyhow, so those are all the things we're not going to talk about. I'm going to hand it over to Andy and let him start the conversation about the things that we do want to talk about.
Ron, your first sentence on your website says, I'm a generalist with deep experience working where policy, services, and digital systems meet. And that makes you the perfect guest for our podcast. Can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and break down what that means?
So, I'm Ron Bronson. We went over that part. I sort of worked in tech broadly for off and on for, close to 15 years, something like that. Counting when you started working on the web depends on what job you count first, right? Do I count the job I had in the late 90s working for an internet startup that went bust after a year? I don't know. Do we count that? Do I count the time in the Air Force? I'm not sure. In any case, so over the years, what I've done though is worked, sort of somewhere where there are problems that involve tech that need to be solved. and that usually involve not just understanding what's going on the sort of presentation layer or what's going on behind the scenes, but what's also going on with the people that are doing the thing, right? And what I've been able to do is sort of bring those things together, right? Like using like people skills or just like I never wanted tech. I still don't want tech to be mysterious to people. I don't want them to use things and feel like, oh, I can't do that. That's techie stuff. And it's like, well, no, you can, and we're going to help you figure out how you can do it. This is not your fault. It's not a user error. Often it's the way we designed it or the way and I think that transition from that old school IT mindset of blame the user still permeates our field, right? Going from that to no, someone should have made this work better. Someone should have made this kiosk work for you so you could do the thing you were trying to do. If we're going to foist this experience on you, then we should make this work better for you. So anyway, I guess that sort of summarizes kind of where I've been. I do work in the public sector right now. There are all kinds of government rules on why I can't say where I work on this podcast. But if you are good at the internet, you can figure that out. But yeah.
So that hearing you talk about yourself in that way and what your central interests are really kind of leads naturally into the one big question that I had for you. And so the words that we've been hearing a lot in the midst of this global pandemic is service design, right? And the failure of service design, in particular, the one I know, I shouldn't say in particular, in the US, but it feels like there are other places in the world where it's happening as well. The rollout of the vaccine sign-up process. And so that was really honestly one of the things that put you on the front of my list was like, who could we talk about and would be so frustrated by how this has worked that we could have a good conversation about that, because I don't do service design. And yeah, I've done some hands-on work and I know more than the average person walking down the street about how these things are developed or whatever, but I'm not a service designer. But I'm sitting here and thinking of 72 million different ways it could have been done better.
Right.
And so I'd love to hear you riff on that a little bit. Think of this as an opportunity to vent.
Well, I do appreciate that. I will quibble with the fact that you aren't a service designer. I think that I read that book. I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna give you your flowers right now. I'm gonna tell you that your book changed my life.
Oh my God!
Your
really?
book changed my life. One, knowing that like, oh, I could do this too. Oh, for real? That was the first thing. But I was doing work in higher ed. I was not speaking in these days. When that book came out, I wasn't speaking that much. I don't know. That just wasn't really on my radar necessarily. But just the way it was obviously very, heft and really detailed, but having all of that and like being very much in the morass of managing content in organizations at the time that I was doing that work really transformed my life. Cause I was like, oh, this is a job. Like, this is a job. This isn't just a thing I do. This is a job. And you can do this at like large scale. So when I go somewhere, I talk to somebody and they say, like a university I went to wants to do a talk, and they're like, oh, we have 100 webmasters on this campus and no central governance. And I said, we should fix that tomorrow. Like, that's not okay.
Oh, that makes me feel really good. That really, thanks
anyway,
for those words. I appreciate
I just had to put that out there because that's, so in any case, it's about service design. Yes, I have many rants. So, you mentioned America versus the rest of the world. And we talk about service design. I did a talk last year at the Service Design Virtual Global Conference or whatever. And I said that one of the reasons I wanted to do that was because, in other parts of the world, they've figured this out better than we have. Partially because it's not this sort of adversarial relationship to public services. In America, public services are really about pain and making people sort of extract, like a pound of flesh, if you will, for, to be able to sort of benefit, because we think of public services as being on the dole, even if it's something that you've paid for. Like, people have paid for these services. But when you come to a thing like a very critical service, like vaccine distribution or whatever else, you have so many. Here's a good service design example. I think it really drives me crazy. It's not even about the vaccine. It's about something different. So I live in the city of Portland, Oregon. The city of Portland has a major trash problem right now, like public trash problem. There are a bevy of reasons for this trash problem, like trash everywhere, strewn all over the city. The reason is because there's not a centralized sanitation department in the city of Portland. Never has been one. There are instead 16 different agencies that have some part of the trash problem. 16.
Wow.
Some are state, some are local, some are regional, some are just offices. And so there's no coordination among these agencies to figure, and one of them includes the prison department, who apparently have to do all the trash on the highways because of COVID. They're not letting prisoners out to pick up trash, which I don't agree with anyway. I'm not going to pay them a fair wage, but that's part of the trash distribution system in this major American city. It's 25th largest metropolitan area in the country. That's bad.
That's such my brain went to, like, I grew up in New York, so we had public and private sanitation, and
I'm from Jersey, same deal.
That was interesting, but nothing like what's going on that you're
nothing
describing.
Like this. This is right. I grew up with that. We had a private trash. People pick our trash at the house. For city stuff, they did other things. You're right. It wasn't this, but when it come down to, like, who picks up trash downtown, that wasn't my mom and dad. Like, we didn't pay someone to do that, or the companies downtown would figure out who to get to pick up their trash on my own street. The businesses pay someone to pick up their trash. What kind of bizarro land do we live in? So we talk about service design. I think in America, it's turned into this bizarre sort of Post-it note thing where you put up Post-it notes and you say design thinking 3 times, and then a witch comes out, or like this dude comes out of a genie and decides to give you your wishes. And that's not service design, right? And even when you talk about things like service blueprints or maps, it's not just about the artifacts. To me, service design is about people and about bringing the experience. What are real people having experiences with? And so when you talk about this whole last year, it occurred to me, and kind of why I sort of really got on this real deep rant about all this stuff and, slowly working on this book and so forth, is it realized that service design was not built for resilience. It never occurred to anybody that we're going to talk about this in this very authoritative way. Service design and blah, 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 and your company needs it, and hire service designers, and we need service designers in government, without realizing that there's no resiliency built into this whole practice at all. It didn't occur to anybody to think about, like, what does service design look like in crisis? But more importantly, what does service design look like? You talk about equity. When you talk about, if you're a store, there's a presumption that everyone going through the store is having the same experience, whether it's you, whether it's me, whether it's Lisa, whether it's Andy, that we're all going to go through the store and have the same experience, and that experience is going to be some sort of wonderful customer experience. We all know that is not true for a multitude of reasons. It could be financial reasons, could be other reasons, right? Like, we know that. But that's not built into the models of any service design at all. No one talks about this in this direct way. Maybe they talk about it abstractly, or they call it about edge cases or something. But I'm like, if all of your customers are edge cases, maybe you need to think about your customer model a little bit better. So when you get into things like vaccines, I think it, or distribution of vaccines, or, this whole era of COVID, things like, no, we're not going to accept cash anymore because of sanitary reasons. Okay, it's a service design problem to me. Foisting new UIs on people to push buttons. Oh, you need a QR code to download our menu if you want to eat here. Okay, well, there are like 5 steps in that are not going to work for people that I know. And now they can't eat at the restaurant because they can't scan a QR code. I'm sure they'll help them, right? Maybe they'll give them a paper menu. I don't know what the process is like if they don't have a phone. I don't know. But we're just grafting this UI layer and all these other things onto everyday experiences and hoping folks just figure it out. And to me, that's not great.
Right. And then we go under the guise of we're trying to remove friction by adding multiple layers of friction on top of another.
Right. And the same experience. We didn't redefine the experience. Like, you could almost be okay with it if you said, all right, we're going to break this experience down in this dramatic way. I can't even think of one right now. But we're going to break down this experience in this way that is going to just remove friction, pay people better. Maybe fewer folks are in the middle of the thing, and it's going to make everyone's experience better. And then you can sort of demonstrate that. It's not what happens. We take this exact same experience as before. The line is still there. The services are still there. And now we add new friction to it. You stand here. You can't walk there. Better have your phone out. Nope, you can't taste anything. Sorry, can't do. Like, it's just. So yeah. So I think service design has a. I don't blame service design as like not a real thing, right? Like, it's not a person. Bob the service designer. We're going to blame him. But I do think that there's something that we need to deeply interrogate about a practice that we're purporting to be all these things that can't quite get it done.
So that, as it relates to the pandemic and vaccine or anything, I mean, the pandemic's so in our face right now, and
right.
And, while we're recording this, the U.S. is we're 27% folks have a vaccine and 40% have one dose or something. I don't know. Maybe I'm making up numbers or something like that. And currently, while we're recording this, Europe is still struggling to kind of roll out their stuff or whatever. Is there any models that you've seen globally? I mean, there are some obvious ones in my head, but just from your perspective, that you think were effective and being a little U.S. centric in this, would those models have worked here, given our culture and values?
Unlikely. I know there are a lot of things going on in Asia that I don't have a great read on exactly like how they were. I mean, I read about in Taiwan how there was a lot of coordination between local and the digital sort of innovation teams and the local government and citizens. Part of that was, the sort of things that were already baked into the culture and climate of the country. It made it a little bit easier to pull that off. Obviously, in Finland, near and dear to my heart, they're having some other issues with some things now related to shutdowns and so forth. They've been very quick to the trigger on that. But one of the things I thought was interesting, pretty much from the start, is they had a contact tracing app like last summer, like in June. Like it didn't take them long to that was amazing how they rolled that out. And they had adoption they had half the country adopt that thing like overnight. Like it wasn't a deal where it's like, oh, no one's going to use it, blah, blah, blah. No. So that was super fascinating to me last year, seeing some of these rollouts of those things.
Why do they work? Why do they work? They're obvious. I mean, I'll just say, for me, part of the, U.S. has this very independent, don't track me culture to it. Right. So, and, right. I have some superficial opinions and thoughts about that myself, but I haven't really read a lot. I mean, I shouldn't say that. I know a lot about online privacy and things like that. Let me just say, I don't have a fully formed, from a Lisa perspective, considered opinion about this. So that's a conversation that I'd probably like to have with some super informed people to really come up with my philosophical view on that front. And so I'm one of those people that actually wants to be informed before I make an opinion, have a strong opinion about stuff. But we do have this kind of thing, and for good and for bad. And so I look at some countries and I'm just like, we're not going to line up like that, right? And so I think that's an important component of it, but how much of it is that we're just disorganized, right? I mean, right. Some of it is we're not going to line up culturally, but some of it is, are we just freaking disorganized?
Again, the 16 different agencies example proliferates around the country for so many different things, or that nobody owns it. We talk about liminality. It's one of my favorite words to talk about in terms of UX. And how so many of these things just fall between, it's either two departments or two people, or nobody owns it because nobody thinks of it as being an important enough experience to hire someone to do. So it's somebody else's job to do it, and it's not their main priority, and it just never gets done. Or it's an office or an agency's job, and it never gets done, or it gets half done. And I think that we just have so many of these kinds of it's like a whack-a-mole of these kinds of issues that exist, and they mushroom. And then again, because there's not resiliency built into these models, when bad things happen, it works fine 80% of the time, day to day. But when bad things happen, you start to see the fissures. You start to see the cracks all through the dam because it didn't occur to you that you needed to look closer than just looking at and seeing, oh, we built the dam. That dam is amazing. Oh, it's so beautiful. Get closer. Where are the cracks? How do we seal those cracks? What's the process of sealing the cracks? Is that someone's job? How often do we check them? How often do we do that? So I think that we are very disorganized. Well, it also to our own peril.
It also sounds like from all that you've just described that we also have the opportunity to enter into a golden age of service design. So coming off the tail end of this COVID-19 pandemic globally, we see where the cracks are, and so
right. Absolutely.
Now it's kind of like when all this crazy stuff started happening with Facebook and was the 2016 election. It's really, it was prior to that, but that's really when it hit pay dirt. And, everyone was really going crazy, and it was like, okay, we kind of knew it was broken already, but now we really know it's broken. Now we have an opportunity to actually behave differently and build things differently. And it's really disappointing because people don't always pick up that mantle and sort of move forward on that.
Right.
It's hard to see the cracks when almost every graphic we create is a Venn diagram, and there's so many things that overlap. It's like, where's the crack until it's right in front of your face, and then you're like, I can't believe I missed that.
Right. Or you deny it. That's always fun too.
Right.
Not everyone wants to see the cracks. I think that's part of the problem. It's like some of us are invested in fixing the cracks before things break. But a lot of folks are just like, do you have to fix that this week? Maybe we can get to that next week. It's still functioning. It still works. It's still sitting there.
Right. Speaking of fixing the cracks, and earlier you touched upon it for a second, you talked about a book that you're working on. And I read about the book is coming out. It's about consequence design. Can you talk a little bit more about what that is and what that means?
I don't know what it means, but I'm working on it. So what happens when you take two words and smash them together and try to make it a thing, and everybody's like, what? And at last year I gave 4 talks on it. Every talk they're like, what does it mean? And I'm like, every talk, the title, if you look at all the, you can't see all of them because 2 of them aren't recorded. But you look at all 4 of the talks, the definition of it changes in all 4 of
That's
the
progress.
Talks. Yeah. Because I think so personally, but if you were doing a quality control check, you'd be like, I don't know, man, about this, but I have given it a lot of thought. I've read a ton of a lot of things about this, and obviously it is sort of an impassioned feeling. Consequence design is a response to service design. So much of design is about, to me personally, is a sort of a offensive posture, and I think we need to find that it's a bit more defensive. Like if you're talking about, a sports guy. And I think you need a not a discipline, because I don't think of it as a discipline necessarily, but like consequence designer is a title for you. But update my LinkedIn. But I think that we need to have. Hi May, that's pretty funny. I think what we need though, and what consequence design tries to do, is it asks the question, basically about resilience. It asks the question like, who you presuppose your audience to be. Why do you presuppose your audience to be that? And what kind of harm have you baked into your experiences? Whether it's a tool, a platform, a service, a system. And I think that because some of these systems now are not just digital things, it's digital layers that we're grafting onto real life experiences. And there's so much of that we're not thinking about. So my favorite example I give all the time everywhere is the supermarket checkout lane. Or like watching folks use kiosks at transit stations, and you see people fumbling with them all the time. And years ago, when I saw folks doing that, I used to think it was their fault. I'm like, it can't be that hard. Come on, let's go. You can do this. I believe in you. From a distance, of course, not to their face. That's terrible. But in my head, I'd watch them and I think this. And then eventually I see enough people fumbling with this thing, especially train kiosk, and I would just go do it myself. And I'm like, this is my life. I do this for a living. And I'm having a problem with this. And I see all the problems with the UI, and I know why it's designed this way. And I'm like, who tested? And my question every time was, I would tweet about it, to no avail. Who tested this kiosk? Take a picture of the screen, Like, this is terrible language. What is this? So consequence design asks that question about liminality. When there are these fissures or these cracks between things, spaces between things that we're building, whose job is it to fix that? Whose job is it to, or more importantly, the question I get, when I used to talk about the mistermed dark patterns, anti-patterns and so forth, when I would talk about that previous to this consequence design discussion, folks would often ask me, well, whose job is it to fix it? Whose job is it to flag that? Whose job is it to stop it? And I'm like, well, if you had this team of sort of master designer types or, practitioners, not even just designers, PMs, engineers, whatever, who kind of had the kill switch to be like, we're not doing that here. Right now it's all illegal, which is, I don't think is the best place for a lot of these big companies of trust and safety. That's just CYA, right? Like that's nothing to do with protecting users. That's protecting the mothership. I think you need that same ideology of protect the mothership, but I want to protect the user, almost like an ombudsman, but for UX, right? But with an ombudsman with the lever to stop the train, and not stop the company, but stop a feature or stop a thing, and to answer those questions earlier in the process of when we're designing this stuff, because we all know, we're all a little too online to know how many times a thing gets released, Twitter uproars, and the thing gets shelved or they change something. And I'm thinking, y'all are a multi-billion-dollar company. You have multiples of hundreds of people working on this thing.
How did it get there in the first place?
Dozens of folks approved it, exactly. And somehow you greenlit this. It went public, and you waited for the world to be like, this isn't it, y'all, as a Twitter meme, right? I don't understand that. So that's where consequence design comes from. And that's sort of where I would hope it would go, is a world where He's like, who stops it? These folks.
Yeah, that's interesting because, Lisa and I met and we started to talk about safety a lot and started to write a book, Designing for Safety, and it's shifted into the podcast, but it's a continuous discussion. And one of the things that always came up is like, how do you embed these pieces of governance throughout the process so that when you realize something's not right, you can stop it? Like, who makes that decision? And too often it's like everybody's pointing a finger at each other, like that Spider-Man meme where he's pointing at like 3 different versions of himself and nobody knows who to make that call.
That's why you need a governance framework, she said self-servingly. But I mean, honestly,
so true.
Like people, I've been screaming this for so long. This is one of the more self-serving things I have said on this podcast. But honestly, I've been screaming, we need to know who makes the decisions. It's not, yes, it is that people sometimes make not great decisions, right? Good, bad, whatever, not great decisions. But more than anything, what I see is nobody either knows that there's a decision to be made or everybody's making the decision because nobody's making the decision. Like it's just the lack of clarity of knowing who makes the decision, because then you know who the go-to person is when you have an issue. And so but people don't want to do that. They just want to build stuff and deploy it and build stuff and deploy it. And they put all this cycles and energies into fixing broken stuff, or legal comes and gets them. It's almost nonsensical to me. Why would you work that way? Yes, when you're first starting and you don't really know what you're doing, okay, I'll give you a pass. I'll give the internet and the web the first 10 years of the commercial web, maybe 15, of we didn't know what we're doing. But now it's like 30.
Right.
And so I'm just kind of like, at what point do we just stop doing that? But anyhow, end Lisa rant. But why not? Like, why? I mean, I guess I could ask both of you all that question. Like, why? Because Andy, you work inside of organizations. Is it really that important to build some of the stuff that isn't really even always all that great? Like, is it really that important? Or like, what am I missing as an outside management consultant looking in and looking at 2 people and talking to 2 people who build things and have to actually deliver stuff, right? I don't, right? So it's easy for me to say, make some decisions. You're not doing it right because I'm standing from the outside. But what is going on? I mean,
it can be anything. It's definitely this quest for velocity. And then it's the roadmap that piles up and features get added and we build things and we're like, okay, we're not 100% sure of this. We're going to test and we're going to learn. We're going to deploy. We're going to learn from it. And what happens is that taste of we released 40 features this month. We're not going to go back and get to those other 12 that we think may not be okay because we have 40 more ready for next month. And that velocity that shows like progress to the organization sometimes creates bad habits. And it takes leadership. It takes people to get aligned and say, you know what? No, we have to go back. You're creating tech debt, design debt, whatever we want to call it. You're just releasing the wrong things. Like maybe that's not the right solution. Maybe we didn't even have the problem that we were trying to solve right. So it's an education over time because we've created this move fast and break things. And that once that became a buzzword and a phrase that companies are using, we're all tech companies now. We're all growth companies now, right? That means we have to keep going forward. There's no like looking back and going back. So it's just a case of re-educating, retraining, and working together differently.
You're nodding your head, Ron. What else?
Well, I mean, so, over the course of certainly in the last 8 or 9 years when I've worked in, like state, local government and what I'm doing now, though if you're listening to this legal, I'm talking about all my work before the last 3 years. I doubt they're listening. I would say that there's that same funny, a lot of that ethos has permeated sort of like, for instance, local government, talking about innovation and like, oh, we're gonna, even in small towns, or, oh, we're gonna move fast and we're gonna do all this stuff. And it's like, we don't have personnel for that. We're not thinking through what that even means. It goes back to our conversation about friction. So I think that there's a desire to frankly, iterate, have the story to tell, so you can level up to the next thing, and then leave somebody else to deal with the cruft of whatever you left behind, wreckage, frankly. And I think that's part of the issue, right? Is that in this sort of fast moving environment, folks can benefit from creating a thing that they don't have to reckon with. And I don't know how you disincentivize that culturally.
Yeah, and so many people, once it launches, they're on to something else. They're on another product. They're on another project. So they really don't have to clean up the mess that they created, because there's such churn and movement in organizations and people jumping to other companies that it really does take like being invested in the problem and setting out long term to try to solve that. So it's another thing that we've created. You mentioned speculative UX. I see that a lot. And I know what speculative futures are, and I know design futures and strategic foresight, but when it comes to UX, could you give a few examples of that?
So I'll be honest, I use that term. It's almost like I would say it's a buzz, but I like sci-fi a lot. I love sci-fi. I'm a big Star Trek. I wouldn't say a Star Trek nerd, but I like Star Trek a lot. And when you think about design futures, I don't see a whole lot of folks that look like me talking about design futures, and I certainly don't. And I know they exist, but I'm just saying I don't see it all the time, and I certainly don't see them being cited all the time, which is it's a detriment. But so I wanted to sort of take that same thinking and extend it to this idea of to user experience in the same ways, and so thinking about things like what informs particular kinds of UIs, or like, what do those things look like? Like what do I know we've talked about, it was years ago, as a podcast episode I listened to, I talked about how much of science fiction, TV science fiction, informed the design of real life tools that we still use to this day, or informed the design of certain UIs. And I'm thinking, so what does that look like in a more like, actual. So when I watch a lot of watch television shows or watch sci-fi or something, I'm thinking about there's actually an example of this on a show once where the character it's the future, it's 24th century, and he's got this voice UI. He tells the voice UI to search this DB our database rather, to look for this name or whatever. And I tweeted about it and I said, you mean to tell me in 24th century, a better way to search queries than like that? You mean to tell me it took him 4 voice commands to get the machine to search this thing? It was quick. It took the thing about 30 seconds to find it. And I'm like, really? We can't do better than that in the 24th century? So that's what I mean. That's what I'm thinking about. But I want that to inform how we design things now. When we all talked about friction and the removal of friction, but we're not reinventing anything. We're just taking existing systems and structures and building the UI layers on top of them. To me, that's not iteration. That's not design. That's not the future, right? We should be it's like throwing all the Legos on the floor and figuring out what we can build almost from scratch.
But that
right?
almost never happens, right? I mean,
of course
it is
not.
that's a shame. I remember, it may be 10, 15 years ago. I can't remember. Whenever the UK decided to consolidate, the UK government decided to consolidate the number of websites and streamline and start that initiative. I wrote a blog post, which is probably not online anymore because it was for my old company, just talking about, how forward-looking that was. And we can argue about the execution of it or whatever, but just how the US could really do something similar in terms of consolidating. And at that point, I don't even think the Office of Digital Services existed in the government at the time that I was writing that. And there was no sort of central hub. And I did a lot of work because I live in the DC area, not for much longer, but I live in the DC area and did a lot of sort of government work. And I really cut my teeth in the early 2000s on that stuff. It was great to see these big, large systems and huge things that had to work. IRS, Social Security. I mean, these are things that have to work. And so, Environmental Protection Agency, which had all this data. And so it's really fascinating to sort of think about that opportunity that governments have to actually open everything up, consider what the intention was, what service you're trying to provide to citizens, and then do that gut redesign. I'm wondering if you can speak to, and if you have any opinions about, what are some of those barriers, just not only here in the US, but just in general behind doing that? Is it just sort of this sort of ennui that sets in? Is it bad old systems that are just sitting there? Are there data structures that aren't talking to each other? Is it too hard? Is it a lack of empathy by governments towards its citizens? Is it what you talked about at the very beginning, this sort of antagonistic relationship that some citizens have with their governments and others do not? So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what some of those dynamics might be, just in a sense, to try and figure out, are those things that we can dismantle or address or loosen up so that we can actually get that work done?
Broadly, I would say that I think that, like, governments are comprised of the people that work in them, right, and that run them, and so I think that across the board, in all of my experiences, I found that for the most part, that people have pretty good intentions, even if they necessarily, like, if you're somewhere where folks, I don't know, this is, especially in like smaller areas where folks may not have all this, they don't know all the things, but like they have energy and a care, right? And so I don't know that it's a care issue. I think it's there's a tension. This is a global thing. I think there's a tension between whatever the right thing is, and I'm putting that in quotation marks, and then there's the prevailing wisdom, right? And there's somewhere along the way, there was a decision that sort of just got made, I think, again, and globally, that we wanted to like mimic whatever was happening in the private sector, sort of, part and parcel.
I see.
And so trying to bring all this, like, well, if they're doing it right, this idea that well, they're doing it right, we're not, so we need to copy whatever it is they're doing, and that's going to make everything better, or for even better, let them do it. And personally, I think that can make things challenging for moving, for that kind of idea. Plus, the other issue is that a lot of these things that you don't have the ability to stop the thing from starting, right? Like, it's already extant. So you have to build the plane while it's flying. And that can be difficult to coordinate when you have all these disparate parties working on their own silos, right? And I think that just as you level up in the various forms of governments across the country, globe, whatever, that becomes more of an issue, right? So I think it's a complex set of challenges. I don't know that there are neat answers for it. I do think that there are answers, but I don't know that there are neat answers. And I think unfortunately, as you said, there are not a lot of people who are trained in this stuff, who are working in these spaces, right? Like, the web is less new than it used to be, but there's just, when you talk about how many folks have like experience with governance, who are also like maybe web savvy, who are also maybe can code, or maybe they don't code, but they know how to like manage big systems, like, the numbers just start to dwindle every time you add a new variable. If you're using a 24th century DB, it would not take very long for it to find these people, because they're just, I think it'd be a really big conference if they came to it. But I do think if you could fit them all at a conference, like, it would be under 25,000 people. I don't think there's hundreds of thousands of people, at least even globally, surely. But like nationally, I don't think there's, a million people that are like, all we need to do is find this million folks and they're going to solve this. It's like, but I think that's a training thing. And I think it's also like the nomenclature of the work. There's so many different terms for a lot of the same stuff. And so no one knows they're all saying the same things. And that, I think part of that is just a sleight of hand to keep people highly paid. But personally, that's just a personal, jokey opinion.
The stuff you're saying is really resonating with me, and it's really insightful. And, one of the reasons that Andy and I wanted to do this podcast is because Andy's a quote unquote designer and I'm a quote unquote governance consultant, right? Management consultant. And, but we're trying to do the same thing. Right, coming at it from a different from different angles, and so I think you're pointing very cleanly to that obvious state that what we're trying to do with all of this technology and with service design is still new. We don't really know what we're doing yet, and because of that, we don't have a lot of people who know how to do that thing. It's not commoditized, right? So it's not like you can go to school for web and internet service design PhD and whatever. So we're just trying to pull in all of these various skill sets and get them aligned. So that's really thought provoking for me.
Yeah, I have a friend that's a service designer, and one of the things she talks about is if it's only digital components, is it really service design, or is that just a version of UX? And I think that's one of the internal questions that I guess everybody's kind of trying to figure out. It's like, oh, I'm going to hire a service designer. What are they going to do? Are they going to do like facilitation plus service design plus UX design plus K? Can they do a UI? It's like, wait a minute. Like we've got these specializations that people can go really deep. And then we have a lot of T-shaped designers or people with design backgrounds. And then we have, generalists like you describe yourself as. I would describe myself as that too, because there's so many things that we've learned over time. But now these schools are really going specialized with a lot of the design degrees. And what I see that comes out of that is there's this inability to really understand the psychology behind all of design, right? It's like, I know how to do these things. I can follow this menu, this recipe to try to solve a problem this way. But then when I find you can't solve a problem the same way every time, there's this like, I don't know, I'm a little frozen. I don't know what to do. I don't know who to pull in, but everybody now owns that. So I'm just curious, is that something that you're seeing as well? Especially like from, as we talk service design, like what is different about that from other disciplines?
It's not clearly defined. Like, even if you talk about things like sort of like UI design or whatever a product designer is this week, at least in those situations, you kind of have a sort of tangible set of artifacts or things. You can talk about the varieties of developer or designer or engineer or whatever, software engineer. Like, okay, you can kind of make sense of that most of the time. With service design, because it's so broad, because if you're in Europe, frankly, or in Asia, what a service designer does is different than what a service designer does in the States, I feel like. Very different. You're going to get very different things, at least in my experience, in those places. The conversations are different. I love my conversations I have with my international friends about service design. In America, I have less edifying conversations with service designers. I love y'all, but also we need some work. So I just
throw money at it.
So I think that, right. Well, honestly, I wouldn't hate that if we throwing money at it meant we were really fixing services. But what we're actually doing instead is in my estimation, a lot of the effort and focus is very focused on doing work in companies that other folks are already doing. Like if you're a change strategist, you're not a service designer, and that's okay. You don't need to be both. If you're an organizational designer, which is totally a thing, you're not a service designer. You have those skills, but they're not the same thing. And so I think we have to call it what it is and also be focused on what it is. And so, really, really narrowing in on the focus of what we're talking about and what we're trying to accomplish and being okay with that. And so in my mind, in my definition, maybe this is just some sort of ecumenical discussion about what service design is. So I subscribe to a school of service design that is services first, that is probably more public sector focused and sort of framed, or is tangentially that way. Fine, you're a government, you're a non-governmental organization that sort of works in the public sector. All right, great. But I think that the learnings from that can be used to inform other kinds of work, other kinds of systems, other kinds of services. But what I feel like we need to do is really improve the ways that we're delivering, designing, ideating, and interrogating the systems that we build for sort of everyday people. I say, and I don't mean that derisively.
No, I love that. The one thing I did want to touch upon too is the work that you have done around organizing communities. And while I'd love to hear a little bit about the Indianapolis Design Week, I've spent so much of my younger days in arcades, and I'm really curious about the Portland Skeeball League.
You owe me some skeeball lessons. This was a Twitter promise.
You know
'cause
what?
I'm telling you, I
One of
think I
these
know how to
days-
play skee-ball. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I am at the skee-ball thing every time, right? Santa Cruz.
We're going to be at some conference somewhere. It's going to happen. I'm telling you, it's going to happen. I'll be the happiest thing I've done. I love it. It's my favorite thing to do other than drink tea. Where do we start? So Indie Design Week still exists. I do not run it. It's a lovely group of folks really good friend of mine, Stephanie Poppy, who took it over when I left Indiana. And has done a fantastic job blowing it up. What I did and what she's doing are two different things in a sense. Because what I did was an idea. It was a more centralized event that I put together, and we just let every area put their own thing on. And what she's doing is it's a conference, and it's really cool. And now it's been virtual for the last couple of years, and they're just the board they have. They're doing just an amazing job. But the reason for that, I run an earlier conference in 2014, in a different place. I lived all over America, But the real idea was that I've spent a lot of my career living in sort of the non-tech areas of America, living in Wyoming and Kentucky and Vermont and Indiana and places like this. And what I always said about that when I did those things was look, people everywhere need this stuff too. You can't just have the expertise all coalesced in one place. You got to spread it. And it turns out when you get to those places, there are a lot of smart people doing interesting things. They're making their communities work. They're doing cool stuff. Some of them are doing really cool stuff. Now everybody works remote. A lot of them are doing cool stuff for companies you know about. And that was a really neat thing to me. And so I thought, well, why can't we do what they're doing somewhere else? And that was what happened a lot. You see, I have friends in a bigger city doing a cooler thing, or at least a cool thing to me. I was like, we can have one of those. Why not? And so that's what spawned Design Week. It just annoyed me that nobody had ever took the domain. It was just, all good ideas come from buying a domain and making the idea up later. And that's what that was, honestly. It was just, I bought that at a conference, and then it was like, well, I guess I built a conference now. So that's what we did. As far as the Skee-Ball League is concerned, while I lived in Indiana, actually, it was a similar deal. A bar had skee-ball lanes. I grew up playing skee-ball in New Jersey on the shore. If you've spent any time on the Jersey Shore, there are a multitude of skee-ball lanes because skee-ball was invented in South Jersey in 1900. In 1900, it was, a Philly guy made it, but the game popularized on the Jersey Shore.
Stealing from Philly again.
That's right. It's a Jersey game. It wasn't made in Philly. He just made it. Oh gosh, that's so funny. So I grew up playing it and kind of, forgot about it because you would only play at Chuck E. Cheese's for a long time as an adult. So I never really got to play it. And then, this whole bar skee-ball thing became a thing. And so while living in Indiana, I actually started a league, mostly out of boredom, really. I mean, I had 6 other things I was volunteering and doing while my job was also happening. But, why not add a 7th thing? And it took off. These some friends really enjoyed it. People I didn't know joined. And that's also still exists to this day. It's a core group of folks that are still doing that. So you talk about community. The fun thing for people listening to this who are starters, I don't know that I start things because I like starting things. I start things because I don't see a thing and I wish it existed. And then I get frustrated that it doesn't exist. And after being annoyed that no one else is going to start it, I'm like, well, fine, I guess I'll just do it then. I'm really good at it now, so it's less of an issue. But back in the day, that's just kind of how it went down. But I'll say this, that the biggest transition point for me was starting groups or orgs or events or whatever that you want to sustain. If it's a one-off, that's fine. Was realizing that you needed to build, again, resilience into it. You need other people. You can't do all the things. It can't be a cult of personality. It can't just be about you. So that if you do leave or you do step away or you need to step away, that community is still nurtured. It's still being built. It's still growing. It's innovating and going beyond. And it's not about you. And that's been cool over the last 10 years. The stuff I've started, some of it still exists in many of the places, or the idea still exists. And that part is cool. When I was younger, that didn't happen. I started a thing, I'd leave, the thing would go away. So that's been really fun. But yes, anybody listening, if you want skee-ball lessons, you can hit me up and I'll start a Switch channel and we can play.
Now I do want to talk about tea for a second. You mentioned one of your favorite things to do was tea. I'm a tea. Basically, tea doesn't exist for me except for the weird seasonal things. But my wife is green tea. We talked about that. Where I remember hearing Samovar Tea Lounge when I followed Kevin Rowe's podcast way back in the day. For the people that are listening that don't really know about tea or they sip it, boba tea is a thing everybody's going on. Where's the gateway into
tea.
liking tea and drinking tea? Where should someone start?
It's actually really funny. So I will say this: tea got me liking tea, like pu'ers and like heavy black teas or like aged black teas, like oolongs and so forth. That got me into scotch, and then that got me into orange wine. So actually, like I've actually morphed to wine, actually, which is weird. I will talk about tea though, but I just wanted to make everybody know that actually it was sort of
you're a beverage connoisseur.
Now I am. Yeah, it was cream soda for a long time. That's all I ever drank.
Oh my God, cream soda is the best.
When I was a kid,
soda, it is really cloyingly sweet.
It is. It really is.
It really is. I don't drink sugar drinks anymore, but it is. Cream soda is a thing.
Yes, but
for
as far as
soda, float.
Oh yeah, but it's more root beer, probably floats. I don't like the float situation. I don't like ice cream in my drink, but yes, it could be a thing, and it would be cloyingly sweet. That's a
yeah, you grow out of that one, I think.
That's a lot. Yeah, definitely. So the tea thing, yeah, I am. As far as a gateway to tea drinker is depending on what you're into. So I get this question. I am definitely your human tea algorithm, I guess. But for people, I had a tea brand very briefly years ago, and turns out I don't enjoy supply chain, so I didn't do that very long. But I think most folks that I talk to about it, it's less about, some folks it's caffeine, and in that case, rooibos isn't tea, but you can drink it. There are also ways to, you can have teas that are, some black teas that are decaffeinated, but you can also do a thing, which is so a trick is if you do a first pour, take your loose leaf tea, pour hot water in it or whatever, pour it out after it steeps and then re-pour it. Typically that'll get rid of a lot of the caffeine. Actually, it won't all of it, but it'll do a job. So yeah, it's an interesting question. It really depends on what you're into, is what I tell people, depending on how to get you into different things. There are white teas, there are green teas, there are blacks, there are, there's yellow teas apparently. Not many. There are a ton of places to source from. The beauty of tea is if you're a person if you're not much of a drinker, much of an alcohol drinker, but you want something that's diverse, a diverse beverage that's pretty cheap. You can get expensive tea, but there's some pretty cheap, It'll last you a long time. And as like I said, the flavor profiles are diverse. There's so much you can do with tea in a way that coffee is diverse, but it's still coffee at the end of the day. Whereas with like tea, it's like, the flavor profiles are so dramatically different, depending on like where you can grow, where the tea grows, and it's a big, vibrant African tea culture, is like, people don't know that, there's tea places like Vietnam and South Korea, they grow tea. What, so it's really fun for me, it was really fun to really get into nerd out. It's kind of probably the theme of this podcast is Ron's nerding out on something. They just get into a thing and then I nerd out about it. And tea was one of those things. So I didn't answer your question explicitly, but the answer to the question is depending on what tea, what things you like to drink normally, I can make a Twitter recommendation of what teas to give you. I can give you a list of things faster than the 24th century voice UI.
So we're almost out of time, but we can't get off the podcast without asking you about Pesäpallo. I don't know if I said that correctly. We just can't. We can't. Because we can't.
I enjoy it. Among many churches I belong to, I love spreading the good news of Pesäpallo, so I have no problem talking about. So Pesäpallo is the Finnish version of baseball, and the reason I say it's because it's what it is. Pesäpallo was invented over about 20 years in the 1900s. It became the sport we see now was popularized in the mid 1920s. And the way it basically ideated was they already had a bat and ball game in Finland anyway that was very different. I mean, bat and ball game, there was like one base, blah, blah, blah. The guy who invented Pesäpallo went to America, went to Fenway Park and saw 2 Red Sox games and said, I can make this better.
He was a service
And so he went home and that's what he did. He was a service designer. Exactly what he was. I can improve this experience for the user. And so he went home. He didn't have any Post-it notes. 3M hadn't been invented yet. He didn't stick anything on the wall, any windows. Instead, he did iterative design over 20 years. And it's actually he's got interesting backgrounds. It's a little questionable, but the story is of how he made the sport is really neat. As a person who invented the sport once, it's really neat that it took him. Because if anybody's ever tried to invent a sport, the deal with inventing a sport is that you need players and you need them a lot and you need a lot of iteration. You got to play a lot of games to get your rule set down. You got to get a lot of once your game starts to take off, when other folks can coach the games and you can just watch. Happened for me over 10 years. It happened for him over 10 years. And so similar deal. So he over 20 years, he kept iterating on the game, doing different versions of it. He ended up being like the first sports minister of Finland, and that's how he had access to people, and also how you get into the schools. So you kind of need access. You can't just be like, oh, I'm going to invent a sport. Like, you know, you didn't copyright it like a lot of folks want to do with their games. Anyway, Pesäpallo is neat. It's the American version. It's not American baseball at all. There's a bat, there's a ball. There are 9 players on the field. There are gloves. Everything else is a little different. The bases are in a different order. But there is a major league of sorts in Finland. And one of the many reasons I love it is there's a major league for men and women in the sport. Unlike America, where we don't let women play baseball for some reason. We siloed them off of softball, one of my many ires about our lovely country. And but in Finland, they do not. And so it's really fun. It's a really fun culture. I got into it, I don't know, a long time ago, 11, 12 years ago. But over the last couple of years, my interest as an American in the sport piqued the interest of our friends in Finland. And so now the Finnish embassy follows me on Twitter. And that's not a joke. And I go to Finland annually and I hang out and speak halting Finnish, and it's very bad, and watch baseball. So lovely place, lovely people, and definitely one of the true joys of my life that I was never expecting to have happen.
Really kind of fun. That's kind of fun to hear. And you're a starter, so who knows? We'll keep our eye open for Ron's U.S. Pesäpallo sports league.
I don't know. I think what would be more likely to happen is an exhibition of 2 Finnish teams over here. That's what I actually want to have happen. Because I think Americans should see it at a high level. It'd be super neat and a true crowding thing. So that's probably the more likely thing to happen. So maybe in a couple of years,
well, Ron,
post-COVID, we can make it
so.
I'm on it. Thank you.
So Ron,
Will do.
You know, we're at that point in the show that unfortunately we're out of time, which I feel like we could talk for days because there's so many interesting things about you. How can people find out more about you and get in touch with you if they want to, especially for those tea recommendations?
Feel free to follow me on Twitter, or just, you don't have to follow me, but just you can feel free to just send me an ad at Twitter and be like, what about the tea? I'm on LinkedIn as well. And of course, you can just go to my website at ronbronson.com. And happy to always love to chat with folks about all the things. Even if you didn't agree with what I said, it's even more reason to talk. So feel free.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me. This has been a blast.
Yeah. And it was good to finally meet you. Maybe we'll meet in person one day.
It's going to happen.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks a lot, Ron.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoy surfacing, please rate, review, and follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also, consider supporting the podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/surfacingpodcast. If you have suggestions for guests or a topic you'd like to hear about on Surfacing, please reach out via the contact form found at surfacingpodcast.com.